So welcome everyone to Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's workshop this evening on grant goals and evaluation. I am Carolyn Koska. I'm the grants administrator here at Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMAC. And I am joined tonight by Crystal Luwaji, our marketing and accessibility coordinator. And you'll find our information tonight should be helpful for organizations, schools, and artists. We'll start out talking about some evaluation basics, why you should evaluate and what to expect in our grants. Then we'll look at developing your proposed outcomes, looking at who will benefit and what changes will take place for them. And then we will talk about creating an evaluation plan by looking at some indicators of success and different evaluation methods. And we'll finish up talking briefly about communicating your actual outcomes by interpreting and reporting your data. As we talk tonight, we'll stop a couple times for questions, but feel free as you think of them to type them in the chat. And Crystal will make sure that we get to those when we stop for questions, or you can also unmute yourself at that time. So why do you need to evaluate your grant project? For one, you do need to comply with state requirements. A summary of your answers about your goals and evaluation goes to the Minnesota State Arts Board and the state of Minnesota to report on how these funds were used. And that really helps to support continued arts funding in Minnesota. So that is very important. Evaluating your project also helps us to determine if our funding is being effective for you. And finally, this actually is useful information for your organization or yourself as an artist. You can look at whether your programs are effective and valuable, if you're focusing your efforts in the right area, what progress you might be making in your art practice. And you can use this evidence that you gather to help with other funding and opportunities you might have and community buy-in. As far as what to expect when you're filling out a grant application, the kinds of things that you'll need to provide in the application, you'll be asked about what are the changes you are hoping will take place as a result of your project, and how will you measure or prove that those changes have taken place. And then if you're awarded a grant and it is time for your final report, you'll have to describe what changes actually did take place for you. So some pretty basic questions. What are the kinds of results that you can look for? The first thing that you might think of are what are called outputs. These are basically the product of your project. These would be things like the actual performance or class or event that you hold, the numbers of participants or audience that come to that as an artist, the actual physical artworks that you completed. So these products of your project are things that can be helpful for you to track, but they're not exactly what we are looking for. We're wanting you to go a little bit deeper and look at the outcomes of your project. So the outcomes would be the impacts of these products that you have. So what results or changes are there because of your project? What did participants take away from the project? How did you benefit from the project? These are what we're actually looking for when we're asking these questions. So examples of this would be what participants learned, how people's attitudes might have changed, how your artistic voice may have developed. And as some examples, for an artist, those outputs might be things like I completed 10 pieces, I completed my final manuscript, I recorded a group of songs, I put on an exhibit or a performance, and then thinking beyond those products to what are the actual outcomes of having done that. The outcomes might be that you develop some skills or your artistic voice. Maybe now having these recorded songs, you have increased confidence in yourself as a musician by having an exhibit or performance. Maybe you've made some helpful connections and built your resume that will help with future opportunities. As an organization, some outputs that you might say, we had 30 students participate, we purchased a new sound system, we added a new genre to our concert series. But looking beyond those outputs to what the actual outcomes might be, maybe those students learn to write haikus. With the sound system, now the audience can hear better and the sound techs have more options for what they can do. By adding that new genre to the concert series, the people in the audience will expand their music appreciation. With those basics, we can start developing our proposed outcomes by looking at things like who will benefit, what kinds of changes are likely to take place, and what kind of time frame are we dealing with. In thinking about who might be participating in and benefiting from your project, you can go through this list to help brainstorm that. It could be yourself as an artist. You can look at different age groups, whether children, teens, adults, seniors are participating and benefiting. You can look at people's various roles in your project, perhaps artists, students, participants, audiences, organization leadership might be benefiting. You can look at some other demographics that maybe you're targeting through this project, maybe people with disabilities, veterans, immigrants. And you can also look at people in different settings. Are you looking at the community at large? Are you looking at people in a school setting, in an institution setting like a nursing home, shelter, correctional facility, people who are participating online? So this will help you kind of brainstorm through who could be benefiting from your project. And it's likely that you'll have more than one group, especially if you are doing something that's public facing. Next, we'll look at some broad outcome areas to kind of get you started thinking about your outcomes. And these are based on some statewide Minnesota Arts goals. So for artists, some of those broad areas that you could look at, maybe this will help you expand and improve your work, connect to new audiences, build capacity through professional development. For organizations, this could help you develop capacities that advance the arts and connect you with your community. For community members, some outcomes could be experiencing increased access to the arts through a reduction in barriers, gaining awareness and appreciation for a variety of art forms, learning new art skills and techniques, and building connections to their own or others' cultural heritage. Once you've thought about some of those broader areas where your outcomes might fall, you can really dive into the very specific outcomes for your project. And these are another group of types of outcomes that can help you kind of brainstorm that. So it could be that you're looking for a particular emotional response or reaction, that you're looking for the experience to touch people in a certain way. Maybe you're looking for a specific changed awareness or attitude about a particular art form, a culture, or some other topic that's important to your project. You might be looking for a specific improved or expanded skill or knowledge in an art form or topic. You could be looking at a new or improved ability or capacity to do something. Something that lets you do some programming you weren't able to do before or frees you up for other things. You could be looking at new intentions and motivations or actual change of behavior for those involved. You want people to be more motivated to be involved with your organization, or as an artist, you want to change how you are carrying out your artistic practice. This could also be a specific change in relationships. If you are wanting to improve interactions among community groups, start a relationship with a new audience segment, as an artist, maybe there's some beneficial connections that you can make. Or it may be a change to some other condition some kind of individual well-being or perception of self, a sense of community identity or strength. So these will help you really drill down to those very specific outcomes related to your project. Once you have some ideas for these outcomes, you'll want to think about what kind of time frame does your outcome require and what's actually possible during your grant period. So you might have a short-term outcome, and these are usually changes in knowledge, skills, attitudes, appreciation, and these are the most likely to happen within your SMOC grant period. An example of a short-term outcome would be exhibit attendees will come away with an increased appreciation for and understanding of abstract art. A more medium-term outcome usually has to do with changes in actions and behaviors, and then these may or may not be possible within your SMOC grant period. So something that would be possible for an artist, maybe they want to establish a consistent daily art practice. That can happen for them within their SMOC grant period. But here's an example that would not really work during that time frame. A theater program for middle school students is hoping it will lead more students to participating in theater once they reach high school. While that is a change in kind of actions and behaviors of those students, you're not going to be able to determine that during your grant period. Finally, we have longer term outcomes, and these are more related to changes in conditions like social, economic, or environmental conditions. And these are very unlikely to actually take place within your SMOC grant period. They can be great for your organization's overall initiatives and great goals for artists to make change in their communities, but it's probably not going to happen within your grant period. So an example of something that would be this longer term change, if you are hoping for your community to become the regional gathering place for traditional music, or you're wanting to do things surrounding transforming rural narratives. These are going to take quite a lot of time to actually develop and happen, and you'll also need to come back and do various reevaluations over time. So while these are great goals to have, they're not necessarily a good match for the SMOC grant outcomes that we're looking for, just because they take a lot longer. You do have the ability to make things fit within your grant period a little better by what you choose for an end date. There's some leeway there. So when you're choosing your end date for your project, make sure you're allowing enough time to evaluate, especially if you're just making a purchase. Give yourself time to use whatever it is and see what difference it makes. So now we've done all of this brainstorming in some different areas. We're ready to put together an outcome statement. An example of this would be, as a result of this project, the people who will benefit will whatever the intended change is. And you likely will end up with multiple statements if you've got multiple groups of people who will benefit or multiple changes that are happening. Once you have this statement, you'll want to do kind of a double check and make sure, is this actually about a change taking place? Is it focused on how participants will be different because of the project? Is this actually an outcome rather than an output? And is this feasible or practical? Can you actually achieve this in the amount of time you have with your participants and the amount of time you have in your grant period? So now we've got some examples for different kinds of projects of what you could have for outcomes. This first one is an artist doing a needle felting project, and their outcomes include: I will improve my knowledge and skills in needle felting realistic animals, plants, and fungi. Exhibiting my artwork will help me move into the art world in a more official and meaningful capacity. And I also hope to introduce the public to species of wildlife they may not realize live in Minnesota. This next example is a school that has a poetry artist coming to do a residency, and their outcomes are that students in grades 9 and 10, so they're pretty specific about who is benefiting, will be less intimidated by poetry and see it as a relevant art form and mode of self-expression. And students will gain the skills to write and share a personal poem in one of the forms they learned about in the residency. This next one is an organization project, a choir putting on a concert. And their outcomes are adult choir members will learn about jazz styles and increase their skill and comfort in singing jazz harmonies. And audience members, made up of adults and students, will gain or increase an appreciation for vocal jazz music. And our last outcome example, another organization project. This one is a theater group purchasing some new lighting equipment, and their outcomes include the lighting crew will experience easier and quicker setup and improved safety. The director will have increased possibilities for creativity in lighting design, and audience members will have an enhanced experience of our theater productions. So those are some example outcomes, and we'll stop here for a moment if there are any questions so far.
I don't see any questions in chat.
All right, we will keep moving along then. Now that we have outcomes, next is creating our evaluation plan. And we'll look at what things might indicate success, how you could gather data and other observations, and what kinds of evaluation types might work best for your project. So the grant application asks you how you plan to measure or prove that your outcomes have taken place. And to do that, you need to think about ways to tell whether your outcome is occurring. What can you look for that would show that your change is happening? And the term for that is an indicator. Basically, what would your change look like or feel like? And the things that you choose as indicators need to be observable and documentable in a systematic way. Though we use the word measure in our question, it doesn't mean that this needs to be a number. There are other ways that indicators can tell us what we need to know. And you'll find that some indicators are more external or tangible and easier to observe. For instance, students that are successfully playing a tune they learned. You can hear whether they're playing it correctly, though you will need to document that in some way. And then other indicators are going to be more internal, like emotions that you experience while looking at a piece of art. In that case, you'll need to find a way to get that information from people. And as you're thinking about this, if you really can't come up with any indicators or a way to know that your outcome is happening, you might need to look at some different outcomes instead. So based on our previous outcome examples, here are some examples of indicators. So our artist who wanted to improve their knowledge and skills in needle felting, an indicator for them could be their new needle felting works show an improvement in detail, form, and polish. So those are some specific observable things that they're looking for. With our student poetry project, they wanted students to gain skills to write and share a personal poem. So their indicators could be students' completed poems show evidence of the key characteristics of the form they chose and focus on a personal subject. And those would also be some external or observable indicators. For our organization doing the choir concert, the choir members wanted to increase their skill and comfort in singing jazz harmonies. And an indicator could be those choir members say that they are more open to sing music with jazz harmonies in the future. And that would be an indicator that would be more internal, that you'd have to find out from those choir members how they were feeling about that. And then for our theater equipment project, They wanted their audience members to have an enhanced experience. So the indicator could be the audience finds that the new lighting system adds to the mood and the clarity of watching a play. Again, another internal indicator. Some of these could also have numbers attached to them. You could maybe be looking for a certain percentage of people to show those indicators. And then you'll want to come up with these indicators for each of the outcomes that you have. So now that you know what you're looking for, how can you observe and document those things? Here are some things you want to think about in choosing your evaluation method. First, what is the nature of your project? Is it a performance or art experience? Is it a class or other learning experience? Maybe it's personal artistic development, organization development, facilities improvement. So those could determine the kind of evaluation you might want to do. You'll also want to think about who you are wanting feedback from. So these might be people of different ages, different abilities, degrees of literacy, people who speak different languages. Again, might determine what kind of evaluation type you'd like to do. Then you'll want to think also about the kinds of indicators that you're looking for. Are they things that are external and observable, or are they more internal results? Are you needing to make comparisons between different groups, like attendees versus non-attendees? Are you wanting to track changes over time and need to get information from people both before and after? You'll also want to think about how long are participants going to be actively engaged with the project. Is it just for one performance or class? Is there some recurring programming over a period of time? And then when are you able to actually interact with them? Do you have access to them before the project, during, right after, days or weeks after? And finally, you'll want to look at what your actual resources are as far as financially, time, people, and technology. So these are things to kind of keep in mind as we are moving along and talking about more specific evaluation methods. We will be sharing, there is a toolkit from the Minnesota State Arts Board that goes into detail about a lot of these methods. And that was a great resource for putting this workshop together. But that will be posted along with the recording of this video. So you don't necessarily have to try and write down all this information. But we'll start out talking about surveys, which I think most people are familiar with. But basically, you will be asking questions that address your outcomes. And these could include question types like rating scales, choosing from different categories, more open-ended questions. You may also include some additional information that you want to know that may not be directly related to your specific grant outcomes, like some demographic information. And then you also have a couple options for how you are going to make this survey available. You could do it on paper and pencil in person. It could be an electronic survey that you send out via email, or perhaps you have QR codes available in person for people to then follow to go do the electronic survey. So you've got a couple different options there. And then some things to consider if you are thinking about using a survey as your evaluation method. It does give you access to those internal indicators, and you can find out what people are thinking and feeling. However, there's not as much depth of feedback because this is something that people are going to want to do quickly and just choose a number on a rating scale. Literacy is required, so you might want to consider if that's appropriate for the age group that you're working with, if it is compatible with languages that you're working with. And people might also need technology skills to do this if you are doing this electronically. If you're doing a paper survey, that does definitely require some time and concentration from people at your event. You do have the potential to reach a large number of people, but you might have a lower response rate, especially if you are doing your survey electronically. And then depending on the method you choose, paper versus electronic, that can affect how much time it takes for you to process the data, whether you are having to tabulate your paper surveys manually, or if you have electronic data that can just be exported from the software that you're using. Another evaluation method is interviews or focus groups. These both have a similar process, but an interview would be one individual at a time, versus with the focus groups, you would have smaller groups of people. And there are some different methods for doing this. It might be more structured, or you'd have some standard predetermined questions and maybe even choices for the answers. Basically like doing your survey just in person verbally. You could do this more in a semi-structured manner with a mix of some of those predetermined questions and some open-ended things, and you can, as you're going along, adjust what you're including and asking. Or you could do this in a totally unstructured way, completely open-ended, no specific questions, and really just allow for open conversation. Some things to think about if you're considering this method. Again, it does give you access to those internal indicators. It allows you to hear all of this in the participants' voices. If you're doing a focus group, know that the participants can interact and feed off each other, which can be either good or bad, depending on the situation. You can get a lot more detailed feedback, especially if you ask follow-up questions and get more information and reasoning behind people's answers. This might be easier for people that have lower literacy skills or different communication needs to be able to do this in a verbal form rather than a written form. You are going to get a lot fewer responses because you can only connect with so many people doing this method. And also for you, it will take more time to schedule and implement this whole process. Another method is structured observation, and the key here is structured. So you would assign people to observe at your event, and they would not interact with the participants at all, and they'll be systematically looking for the behaviors of the participants. So not just somebody who's at the event who later shares the impressions, but you'll want to create a specific guide for what those observers are looking for as far as indicators, certain categories, and they'll need to take some pretty detailed notes and complete a write-up almost immediately afterwards, so they don't forget what they have been observing. And some things to consider with this method, it really can capture the essence of a moment in your experience that you're having, and it will collect more of those external indicators. It doesn't rely on people self-reporting things, which can be inaccurate, especially if memory recall is involved and people often under or overestimate things you're asking them about. This method can be less invasive and labor intensive for participants, especially if you don't want to pull them out of the experience. And it can work well for less structured events. However, your observers really need to be trained and prepared and collect those very systematic notes. Next, we have some more creative methods. You could ask the participants to stop and reflect for a moment and then share one thing with you before they're leaving, though you need a way to document that. Maybe you have some video going to document that. The method called Fist to 5 Everyone can raise their hand with corresponding number of fingers, 0 to 5, to indicate their ranking or reaction. You'd need to have somebody there to quickly count or at least get a general idea of those reactions. You could do something like have people vote with some stickers on a poster, put things like a piece of candy or button into various jars based on their reactions, like which of these things helped you to engage the most, what was your emotional response, things like that. Tree of knowledge. Each person can choose to write an answer like one thing they learned on a little paper leaf and add it to a tree, whether that's a poster of a tree, some sort of 3D representation of a tree, or you could go with a totally different object and concept, but this is a good one for things like festivals. A movement survey. You would have people move to different labeled corners of the room to indicate their responses. You could do a postcard home, have your participants fill out a postcard that will be sent to themselves. You can ask them to talk about things that they learned, what was their favorite part of the experience, a message to their self when they get home. So you would collect the postcards, grab any data that you are looking for off of those, and then mail them to the participants. So with these creative methods, you could do one of these as kind of your main evaluation, but you could also have a QR code nearby to bring people to fill out some other things, like some demographics that might be helpful for you. So some things to consider for these creative evaluation methods. They are very engaging for participants. It can help you collect data in settings that are more challenging if the participants don't have very much time, if they have barriers to some more traditional methods, if for whatever reason it's harder to follow up with your participants. However, it can be a lot more difficult to come up with concrete data and report on some of these. And you also can't tie responses to an individual or their characteristics. Finally, some more artist-friendly evaluation types. These are especially helpful for artists, but can also work for other types of projects. You could do a review or critique by looking at a portfolio, your completed works, a performance, an experience, a class assignment, and the review or critique itself can be done by experts, teachers or mentors, peers, or yourself. And you can get some feedback and also some more technical evaluation of your work. This can also be helpful in a school or class setting. And you might want to make some comparisons to previous work, for instance, to help look for improvement. Another option is journaling, and this can be used to document your experiences, processes, results, emotions or responses, interactions that you have with different people. And this is best for self-documentation, where you're in a situation where you can choose what to share of what you've journaled. So this may not be great for a situation where you're requiring an entire class to share what they've journaled about the experience. You want people to be able to have a degree of privacy and choose what to share. So as an artist, if you also have a public-facing component to your project, you can use one of those other evaluation types that we talked about in addition to one of these to evaluate your own work. Regardless of the method that you choose, here are some tips for you. Be aware that you probably will need multiple methods to be able to capture everything that you're wanting to capture. When you're gathering information from others, it's great to be able to explain why do you need the information, whether it's anonymous, how you're going to use it. It's good to keep all your questions as simple as you can at an easy reading or comprehension level. You don't want to use leading questions. So instead of saying, explain why you loved this exhibit, you would want to ask something like, what did you like and dislike about this exhibit? You'll also want to make sure you're just asking about one thing at a time. So instead of saying, how would you rate the instructor and venue, you'd want to separate those out into two different ratings. Also make sure that you are not overburdening participants and really stick to the most essential information that you need to know from them. And most importantly, make sure that your evaluation captures the actual information that you need related to your outcomes. We see pretty regularly people who have outcomes like, we want this performance to make people more aware of something, to make them more connected to their neighbors. But then their survey just has, how did you like this on a scale of 1 to 5? So make sure there isn't a mismatch between what your outcomes are and the kind of information you are capturing in whatever method you're using. In explaining your evaluation plan in your application, you would want to include how you're going to gather this data and then what indicators you're looking for. At least try to include those indicators. Sometimes they can end up being kind of redundant as you're writing things out. Just do what makes sense for that, but we don't just want you to put, I will do a survey. We want to know, what are you looking for this survey to tell you? What kinds of answers are you hoping for? So in filling out your application, you would include that full version of outcomes like we looked at earlier, plus your evaluation plan. So really between the two, it's really just a couple of paragraphs that you're including. And we'll jump into some examples here. So here's our artist project again. On the left, we've got the summary of the outcomes that they were looking for. And their evaluation plan includes comparing my previous art to my new works. I will look for improvement in detail, form, and polish. So they've got a method and then what they're looking for. In my journal, I will track recognition from other artists or exhibit venues, along with any changes in my confidence as an artist. And exhibit visitors will be able to put different colored stickers by the animals and plants that were new to them or that they didn't realize lived in Minnesota, enabling me to measure knowledge gained. So you'll see that here they have multiple types of evaluation, and then a way to document each of the outcomes that they were looking for. So we've got some comparing work and a critique, we've got some journaling, and we've got a more creative method with the stickers for the exhibit visitors. And here is our school poetry project again. And their evaluation says we will survey students before and after the residency, asking questions like whether they currently read or write poetry, think poetry is relevant to them, etc. See attached survey. So there is a place in the application to attach a survey or other evaluation tool that you're using. And if you can at all include that, that's very helpful. And continuing on, we'll look for a more positive attitude toward poetry in survey answers after the residency. Also, the residency artist and English teacher will review the poems written by the students, looking for evidence of key characteristics of the form chosen and a focus on personal subject. And finally, the English teacher will observe whether students are able to give clear and confident readings of their poems at the fall festival. So we've got a before and after survey, we've got a critique, and we've also got some observation here. And on to our organization, Community Choir Concert. Their evaluation includes that choir members will be surveyed at the beginning of the season and again after the concert. We'll look for their post-concert answers to show an increase of knowledge of jazz styles and willingness to sing music with jazz harmonies in the future. The choir director will observe and reflect on changes in choir members' skills during the project, and audience members will complete a survey of the performance. We'll look for a majority of ratings of the performance to be positive, and for at least 30% of the audience indicating an increase in their appreciation of vocal jazz music. So we've got a before and after survey again, we've got some observation, and then our audience survey. In cases where you have both a participant survey and an audience survey, it's great to include both of those. And our last project type here, this was our theater group purchasing the lighting equipment. And for their evaluation, they say after the first production with the new lighting system, the director will meet with the lighting crew to hear about the changes they noticed in ease of setup, safety, and performance of the system. The director will write a summary of the new system's effectiveness in supporting the creativity of their lighting design. And for the first production, questions will be added to the audience survey about their experience with the new lighting. We will look for at least half of the audience to say that the new lighting was effective in adding to both the mood and clarity of the show. So they've got either an interview or focus group for the first bullet point, depending on how many people are involved with that lighting work. We've got some reflection and journaling by the director, and then an audience survey. And we'll also have a handout that includes some of these examples of the outcomes and evaluation plans. And we'll stop again here in case there are some questions at this point.
So far, none in chat, but I will let you know if any pop up.
So once you have used these evaluation methods to collect your data and your observations, you can communicate your actual outcomes. And you'll need to interpret what you gathered and decide what to include in your grant report. So when you come to analyzing and interpreting your data, depending on what type of evaluation you did, you might only need some of these steps. But you'll start with compiling all of the feedback that you have. This might be entering paper survey responses into a spreadsheet. As an artist, you might be gathering the information from some different critiques you received from peers or mentors. So just get everything all together and ready to look at. If applicable, you can count the types of responses or answers you received for each question. And then you can convert those to percentages, like what percentage of people answered agree or strongly agree. And then you would make any comparisons you were planning on if you were looking at comparing before or after information, or comparisons between different groups and demographics, maybe based on some of those other details that you collected. So that could be things like, did different ages or ethnicities have different responses to your project? And you want to just look for overall trends in all of this information that you gathered. Then at that point, you'll want to kind of put together an interpretation or summary of your results. You don't want to just leave this as a list of percentages. And you'll also want to take some time to review and reflect on your results as an organization or an artist, and think about what do these results mean for you. So then at this point, you'd be ready to fill out your grant report and the questions there about your outcomes. And first of all, don't just put all of your survey results, like that list of all of your percentages, or certainly raw data. Don't just put that directly into your report. While that might be useful to you, not everything that you collected might be relevant to your grant or your proposed outcomes. There is a separate section in the report that's about how the carrying out of the project went, and some of that might be relevant there. But you'll want to think about what data is actually related to your proposed outcomes. Then in entering that into your report, you'll want to write it up as a narrative, your interpretation or summary. And some of the outcomes you may find turned out different than you proposed or expected, and that is okay. So now you've completed all of your requirements for your grant. but you also now have information that you can share with your community and stakeholders. And this might be where you'll pull in some individual stories from your project and some quotes. And you can use all of this for your benefit beyond the grant. It can be evidence for other funding and opportunities for you. So that is all of the information I wanted to get to this evening. We went through it pretty fast since there haven't been any questions. But as I said earlier, we are recording tonight. This will be posted on our website along with that State Arts Board evaluation toolkit that we talked about, along with those other examples of outcomes and evaluation plans. And here is how to find where that's posted. If you go under grants to grants help, and it will be on this workshops and assistance page. Those of you who registered for the workshop this evening, you'll get an email once the video and those materials are available and posted, for sure by the beginning of next week. So now we can just open up again if there are any questions or specific things that you'd like to talk about.
Quiet group tonight.
Well, hopefully this has been helpful and given you some ways to think about evaluation, so that doesn't sound like such a foreign concept. Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and look out for the recording and resources that'll be posted on our website. Have a good evening.